Hello, blessings, and welcome to Raise Your Vibration. What we are exploring this evening is how to access the range of vibrations. Now, everything in the universe is a vibration, and you are a range of vibrations yourself. And in fact, many people intuitively sense that there's something about higher vibrations that's somehow good, and they intuitively sense that there's something about lower vibrations that is somehow less good. What people often do not know how to access is how do you get from where you are to a higher vibration. Now, one of the things that makes that challenging is that people often judge where they are. And the reason for that is that they feel that they are somehow stuck in the frequency that they're in, or they're somehow stuck where they are, and so in a sense they are resisting that, and they don't quite know how to make the shift. So we are going to explore how to actually raise our vibration. And it turns out that it's a simple and gentle thing to do. Now, to help us, we are going to be using the frequency scale or the depth scale. So if you have downloaded the Aura chart, you'll see to the right there's something that looks like a vertical line with little multicolored crosshatches. That is the depth scale or frequency scale. We are going to be using that. Now, if you happen to be somewhere and you don't have this little chart in front of you, really simple to make one. All you need to do is make a vertical line on a piece of paper. And if you find yourself in a location where you don't have any paper at all you need to do is just look at a straight line. So you could look at the edge of a door. That could be your frequency scale. Or you could look at the edge of a table, and that could be your frequency scale. Now, it's that easy because you are using that technology, the vertical line, as a way to access the range of frequencies. So let's start to practice with that, and let's find out what we can do just by accessing this range of frequencies that we and everything consists of. Now, take one of your fingers, doesn't matter which one, and just place it on the scale. Now, just to get used to it, just gently move your finger up and gently move your finger down. The interesting thing is that you don't have to literally touch the scale. In other words, you could be several feet or several meters away. You're simply tuning into it and looking at it and using your intention. You're pointing at it, or you could even use the hand in your mind. You could imagine pointing at it. Now, notice what happens. Let's assume that the lower frequencies are the bottom of the scale and the higher or faster frequencies are the upper end of the scale. Now, just gently sweep up with your fingertip and then gently sweep down. Now, what I'm asking you to do, notice the subtle shifts that happen in your consciousness. And at first, I admit it might be quite subtle. But notice that something happens when you shift your attention to higher frequencies, and something happens when you shift your attention to lower frequencies. Now, that's going to be a big part of what we do this evening, simply making these shifts. Now, let's take it to a bit more of a specific intention. Let's have this frequency scale represent you right where you are right now. Now, place your fingertip towards the bottom of the scale and just start to wiggle your finger gently and slowly, a little bit higher on the scale, and then back to where you started. Now, this is going to seem as if it's very subtle at first, and it's going to seem as if you're imagining it, but gently move your finger up on the scale and gently move it down, and something starts to happen. Now, the scale is not changing you. You are changing you through your awareness because you're starting to tap into the possibility that there are finer frequencies or higher frequencies. So keep on gently moving your finger up and gently moving your finger down on the scale. And the texture of your beingness starts to change. The texture or the fineness of your frequencies is starting to change. Now you might wonder, well, why not just move the finger up to the top of the scale and leave it there? That would be a really important question because you would think, well, if higher frequencies are good, let's just move up to those high frequencies and stay there. but not so fast, because that's not how reality works. Reality is conscious and alive, and it doesn't want to be forced into anything. And everything takes place in its own way and its own time. And so this is very subtle, gentle work. And a big part of this is that we are discovering that it's not just a matter of intending to be at a high vibration, and we are surely not forcing ourselves to be there. A big part of this is learning to be comfortable where you are and learning to gradually shift your energy. Now, the reason that's so important is that whenever people try to force themselves to be something that they are not, they tend to get a snapback or a resistance. It's almost as if they are out of alignment with their own truth. And so it seems like a simple technique, but you are learning some really profound things here. So from the frequency that you are naturally at, just move your finger a little bit higher on the scale and just start to tune in and notice what happens to the vibe or the feel or the texture of the presence within you. What happens to you when you move a little bit higher on the scale? And then move your finger back down to where you started. Now, the reason it's important to be able to move back to where you started is because that helps you release resistance to where you honestly are right now. And then every time you move your finger a little bit higher on the scale, that's releasing your resistance to the higher frequencies. So we are letting go of judgment, and we are exploring what is it like to be okay with where we are now, and what is it like to gently expand or extend our consciousness to a somewhat higher frequency. And remember, we are going to a somewhat higher frequency so as not to push or force any issue. So right now, you are looking brighter, and your aura has more vibrancy, just because you are becoming more conscious of energy and because you are raising your vibration somewhat. And interestingly, you are also getting a higher, finer frequency because you are letting go of resistance to where you are. Now, you can do so many things with this. We are learning in a very basic way, but the more creative you become with this, the more you realize that with a bit of focus and intention, you could do some quite wonderful things just using this simple technology. And one of the most essential things that you learn by doing this technology is that you are made of energy and that you can shift that energy. Now, let's notice what happens. Let's explore the range of the scale, and we are going to do it slowly and gently. Now, move your finger a little bit higher on the scale. Notice what it feels like. And then move a little bit higher yet again. And notice what that feels like. And then a little bit higher. Now, what's interesting, when you do this really slowly and deliberately, you realize that you don't want to force a super high frequency. You realize that when you do this slowly and deliberately, you make little shifts. Doing this slowly and deliberately is teaching you about your consciousness. It's teaching you what your body feels like. It's teaching you what your aura feels like. Now, gently bring the frequency back down to where you started. Now we're going to try just wiggling the finger a little bit slowly. What you're doing is just moving one increment up. It's like moving a notch up. Move it up and then move it down. Move it up and move it down. And it might seem at first as if not much is happening, but you will start to notice one increment on the scale, it's a big shift. Now the reason that's so important, even though right now it might seem like a rather subtle matter, it's important because when you realize that one increment of change changes the way you feel, that revolutionizes your understanding of how to change yourself. Because when you are in a state, emotionally, mentally, or physically, whatever state you're in, if you are judging that state, you are in resistance to yourself. You are in resistance to the condition that you are in right now. Many times when people do not like their state, they are judging it and telling themselves, oh, if only I could be in a very different state. And of course, wishing that you were in a very different state of consciousness even more judges where you actually are. So it's quite an amazing thing to be able to realize that shifting one tiny increment on the scale changes how you feel. So what that means is you don't need huge changes. You can learn to change comfortably and incrementally. You can change bit by bit without pushing or forcing. And try this right now. Just put your finger anywhere on the scale, and you will access the part of you that is at that frequency. Now, wiggle your finger just up an increment or two, and then back down, up a notch or so, and then back down. Now remember, you are a range of frequencies. So it's not that the entirety of you is at one point on the scale. There are probably parts of you that have low vibrations, probably parts of you in the middle, and there are some parts of you, some cosmic parts of you that are already at a very high frequency. Using this, you can work with all the different parts of you through any part of your range, and you can do gentle healing shifts that are very useful to you. So just pick any point on the scale, and that will help you access the part of you that's already at that frequency. And then move up a notch or so, and then move your fingertip back down, and then move up and down, and continue doing that at your own pace. And if you want to move your finger 2 or 3 notches up, try that, and then gently bring it back. And this is giving you familiarity with the range of frequencies that you are made of, and it's giving you a sense that you are capable of making shifts. So right now, that makes you look brighter. It makes you look more connected. It makes you look more smooth. So right now, you're getting the feel for working with the scale. You're getting a sense of your own energies. Very good. Now, just to show you what happens, when you make shifts that are really big, just prove to yourself what happens here. Put your fingertip towards the bottom of the scale and then move it all the way up to the top. And at this point, you have more familiarity with the frequency scale. And so you might notice it feels a little bit unusual. It might feel strange. It might induce a somewhat lightheaded feeling, and you might think that's wonderful. It might seem exciting at first, but what's really happening is that you're just forcing something more quickly than it needs to ideally happen. Now, you can learn about some of your higher frequencies by moving your hand up to the higher end of the scale, but if you do that, breathe into your body and stay centered, and then gently lower the frequency. Now, many people think, oh, well, high frequencies are good. They are somehow superior. No, your ideal is to be integrated. And so if you do sweep your finger up so that you can access the highest frequencies, slowly sweep your finger back down. That will help you integrate the higher frequencies that you accessed momentarily. You see, it's more useful to you to be able to integrate something than to simply give yourself a thrill. Many people think that if they have a peak experience, that will transform them. It actually does not. If something is not integrated, it doesn't matter that it was exciting or cosmic or whatever it seemed to be. And so one of the things you learn by carefully and cautiously working with the frequency chart is that you discover that you can gently sweep your energies up and you can gently lower the frequency so that you can integrate, so that you can digest the experience. One thing that would be useful, by the way, is to shift the thinking from good, bad to slower frequencies versus faster frequencies. The slow ones, although if they're too slow, they might turn negative, are not necessarily bad, and they could even be grounding. So let's explore and let's find out what you discover. We are going to go through some experiments now. Let's take one particular thing. Let's take your body and let's work with shifting the frequency in the body. So just to start, tune into your own physical body and with your consciousness, sweep through the body and just notice what you find there. And you might find some areas where the energy seems to be flowing, and you might find some areas that are a little bit tight. So let's try a little experiment using this frequency scale. Now, while tuning in to your body, gently move your finger a little bit higher on the frequency scale. And remember, you can place your finger anywhere on the scale to start. Not right at the top because you want some room to work, but place your finger while tuning in to your body and then gently move the fingertip up a little bit and just notice what those parts of the body feel like that had been holding some tension, and then move your fingertip a little bit higher on the scale. That's good. And then down a little bit. Maybe not as low as where you started, but just down a little bit. That helps you integrate. And then up a little bit higher. Notice what it feels like. And then move the fingertip down a little bit. And higher a little bit. And maybe at this point, you are getting a little bit of relaxation in that area. And maybe your breathing is a little bit easier. Now, your goal is not to force your consciousness or your body up to the highest end of the scale. Your goal is to raise your vibration just enough that you can gently let go of tensions that you do not need. The reason that you don't want to force it up to a much higher frequency is because that would be disorienting. That could induce spaciness. The goal with wellness is to be integrated. And so to achieve integration, you want to do things mindfully, slowly, gently, gradually, in a non-forced way. Now, let's find out what happens when we work with a body system. This is going to show you how, by combining your intention and awareness with the frequency scale, you can make some nice shifts. So a body system, for example, the nervous system is one of the body systems. The skeletal system, your bones. The muscular system, your muscles. The circulatory system, your blood and heart. These are all body systems. Tune in to one of those body systems right now. Just sweep with your consciousness through your physical body and really tune into that body system. Okay, so you have that in your consciousness, and then you are going to place your finger somewhere on the frequency scale and gently move your fingertip up just a little bit while being aware of that particular aspect of your body. And then you move the fingertip back down a little bit. And just wiggle the finger slowly and deliberately, mindfully, up and down. Now this is freeing the energy in that body system that you are tuning into. It's freeing it from the stagnant state of consciousness that it had been in. Good. And begin to move your fingertip a few notches higher on the scale, a few notches higher on the chart. Notice what it feels like in that body system, because you are still sitting comfortably, still mindfully being there. That's good. Excellent. Now you might wonder, is there some way that you need to complete this? And actually, there's no particular completion point to any of these exercises. It's the doing of the exercise, the process, that gives you the benefits. And so once you start tuning into a body system, and once you have raised the frequency a little bit on the chart and moved your fingertip up and down, you have already started to access a new state of consciousness. And you did this in a subtle enough way that you did not force anything. It was not too abrupt. And it really lets you shift the consciousness. So now, when you tune into that body system that you were exploring, you might find that it feels lighter or freer or easier in some way. And so this is one way that you can use frequency awareness to literally raise the vibration of your physical body and anything in the physical body. Now, you might have heard the terms micro and macro. Micro meaning small, down to the level of a tiny cell, or down to the level of one part of the body. Macro meaning everything, the entire body, or even the entire universe. This technique of raising your vibration can be used for all things micro, all things macro, because this is simply a technique to tune into anything and to gently shift the range of possibilities, gently raise the vibration. So here's an example of micro. Tune into one of your body systems, the muscular system, the circulatory system, skeletal system, nervous system. One of those systems. Pick one little area. For example, if you were tuning into the skeletal system, tune into one bone. If you were tuning into the nervous system, tune into one area, one nerve. So let's do the same technique as before, but now we are tuning into this one localized area for this one body system. So place finger on chart and gently play with moving the fingertip up a little bit on the chart, raising the frequency, bring it down a little bit, bring it up, bring it down for this one small area of the body. Now, one thing you might notice, you might find subtle shifts happening, but there are some things that you might wonder about. Now, what you need to understand is that everything that takes place in your body and mind generally takes place in layers. So there is layer upon layer of experience there. So one of the things that you might uncover as you explore with this technique, you might find that you get a release. You feel something releasing, but then you feel more tension emerging in that part of the body. And at that point, you might judge yourself or judge the experience. But please do not do that. What's really happening, you release a layer of tension. And so the next deeper layer has surfaced. So here's how that might work. You are tuning into a part of the body, and you are gently shifting the frequency up and then shifting it down a bit to integrate. And you're doing that again and again. And you really do notice something releasing. But then you start to notice, oh, there seems to be something deeper. And remember, that is a good sign. It means that you released a surface layer, and now you are at the next layer. So the question is, what do you do then when that happens? You tune into that next layer that surfaced. It might be a little tense or could even be mildly uncomfortable because, frankly, it was something that was deeper, something that might even have been hidden from you, from your awareness. So you tune into that, and then you find where your finger intuitively goes on the chart. Sometimes it might even go to a lower frequency than before because you've tuned into a heavier, deeper frequency that was hidden. And gently move your finger a little bit up a notch or two on the chart, back down to integrate, and repeat that many times. Do it slowly and mindfully. Don't just wildly wiggle your finger around. That wouldn't do much. This is a slow, mindful, meditative process. It's a very deep meditation in a way. So you've got that deeper layer surfacing, and you tune in to the frequency scale, and you gently move your finger up and gently down. And something wonderful often happens. you find that that deeper, uncomfortable sensation, the blocked energy, is starting to shift. Now, you could say, in a way, that what you are exploring here is a way to clear blocks. But this way is very different from other things you might have experienced, and it's very different than what we might have done together on different occasions, because we are doing all of this evening just using frequency shift. Now, naturally, when you are actually working on situations for yourself and to help others, you can freely use this technique and combine it with other techniques. But just for the purpose of learning this evening, we are actually doing everything with shifting the frequency. Now, on your own time, explore different body systems. Explore what happens when you raise the frequency. And remember that you are doing it mindfully, slowly, and gently. And remember, and this is, by the way, a general principle in energy healing or metaphysics of any kind, your intention is to work slowly and gradually and deliberately. Your intention is not to force anything. When you get used to that idea of working by increments, working bit by bit, you find that is a deeper, more profound way to work. It keeps your ego out of it because you're working gently and deliberately, slowly and mindfully. And that is higher consciousness. Higher consciousness is not an oblivious state where you are floating above everything. Higher consciousness could also be called mindfulness, and it could also be called deeper consciousness. And that's what this practice of gently raising your vibration helps you to accomplish. Let's tune into using this technique for the emotional body, for the emotions. Now, if you tune into the space where your physical body is, that's the same space where your emotional body is. So you could think of all the emotions that you feel, the feelings and sensations and emotions. Well, you feel them, meaning that they take place through your body. They take place in the space where your physical body is. You could think of your emotional body as existing on a finer frequency than the physical body, but it's located in the same place. So how do you access your emotions? You tune in to the space where your physical body is, and the basic emotions that you would want to raise the frequency of. Things like sadness, emotions like fear, emotions such as anger. You could think of those as the big three: fear, sadness, anger. Those stagnant energies from so many experiences in this life and other lifetimes exist in the space where your physical body is. So we are going to explore working with those. Now take, just for example, the emotions of sadness or grief. Now, you might have awareness of particular situations, or you might just have a vague sense that there might be some sadness or grief somewhere in your space. And you probably do not like it, and you probably wish that it was not there. So we are going to explore a new technique. So tune into your body, especially the emotional aspect of your body. Now, place your fingertip at the bottom end of the scale. What that is doing, it's helping you to access the heavier emotions. And don't worry, we are going to shift these. You are working mindfully, and you are tuning in. You recognize that there may be some sadness present. You place your fingertip at the bottom of the scale, gently move a few notches up. And let's just hold there for a moment. Keep breathing. Don't be tense. But when you raise your fingertip a few notches on the scale, what starts to happen to that texture of sadness? I call it a texture because all emotions are energy, and energy can be felt as a vibration or a sense or a texture. And then move another notch or two up on the scale. You have actually changed the sadness. It's now at a higher frequency. Now notice what we do next. Move your fingertip down a few notches. The reason for that is that we want to get familiar with this range of frequencies. We're not trying to run away from anything. So move down on the scale a little bit and then slowly back up. What I want you to experience here is that you are becoming more familiar with a range of frequencies. This is a very unusual way to explore this because generally people want to simply run away from what they do not like. And often people try and verbalize their way through things, talking about what they're sad about. We are doing something very basic and primal here. We are working with this experience as a frequency, and we are playing with shifting the frequency. So bring your fingertip almost down to the bottom of the scale, and then slowly bring it up maybe 3 to 5 notches. And let's just see what happens. And by the way, if you are looking at the chart that you downloaded, you might see numbers like plus 1,000 and minus 1,000 and so forth. That is entirely symbolic. It has no literal meaning. It's just to give you a symbolic understanding that there are low frequencies and high frequencies. And if you are using a chart that you drew on a piece of paper with a vertical line, you don't even need the numbers. You just need to use your sensitivity, moving your finger gently up and gently down on the scale. So it's very simple, and anybody can do this. And anybody will become much more aware of subtle energy and much more capable of shifting their energy and raising their vibration if they play with this a little bit. Now, one thing you might notice is that you're starting to feel lighter, but remember, as when you were working with the body and you discover that everything is in layers, you might move your finger a little bit up and a little bit down on the chart, and you might have a release of a surface layer of sadness, assuming you were working with that. It would work on anger just as well, and it would work on fear just as well. So remember, get the principle, get the basic technique, then you can start to work with all kinds of things. Your creativity combined with your willingness to do this mindfully will let you do some wonderful and splendid healing things for yourself. Now, if, as you work with the sadness, you feel something heavier or deeper, you don't quite know what it is, there's an important principle even there. You don't have to know what it is. Just intuitively place your finger on the chart and just start to wiggle your finger a little bit higher on the chart. You wiggle it so that you aren't forcing it to go all the way to the top of the chart. That would produce resistance. You wiggle it higher, wiggle it lower, wiggle it higher and lower. That frees you from being stuck wherever you were stuck. But it also educates you. There's an important education process with doing this kind of technology. What you're learning here is that what you thought was sadness is not exactly that. It's not that the sadness is happy, but energy is something that is beyond what we have labeled it to be. This is one of the mystical discoveries that comes to you when you practice this kind of technique. You realize by shifting frequencies that what you thought was sadness was simply a stagnant, heavy pattern. And you feel it start to change, and you feel various sluggish energies in there starting to change. And it really makes you wonder about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness. We have a question that just came up about whether this technology can be utilized to assist anybody else, which is an important question because the answer is yes, most definitely. But in order to help somebody else, practice doing this with yourself so that you become familiar with the shifts. And the reason for that is that if you want to sense what's happening with somebody else, you have to have experience sensing vibrations. So if you were working with somebody else, notice on the aura chart that you printed out, right next to the frequency scale to the right of the chart, there is a picture of an aura, a person with layers of their aura. You can use that when you are assisting somebody. And so the person doesn't even have to be in the room with you. Just tune into the aura chart. Let that represent the person whom you are assisting. And tune into a particular aspect of their body or their emotions or their mind that you choose to gently raise the vibration of. And by looking at the aura chart, you intuitively get a sense of what might be stuck in that person. And then you find out where that stuckness is on the frequency scale. And as you have been practicing, you gently raise the frequency. But remember, you don't force it up to the top. You gently bring it up and then gently bring it back down so that there's no resistance. And you do it all very gently and very slowly and very lovingly and mindfully. Now, let's work with the mind. Let's tune into ourselves and realize that in the same way that you have a physical body, in the same way that you have an emotional body, you have a mental body. Now, the mental body is in the same location where the physical body is, but on a higher frequency, or as some people put it, a higher octave. Now, you might generally think of your thoughts as being in your head, and you might think of them as being in your aura. Well, they are there because they're everywhere in your personal space. For best results, tune into any thoughts that trouble you by scanning your entire body. The reason for that is that thoughts are actually living within every part of you. You want to be able to locate them, whether you feel them in your head, in your heart, in your body, or as energies that are around you in your aura. Because when you can locate something, it's easier to access it, and it's easier to sense it as energy. Now, that's one of the practices that you are learning here as well. You are learning that if everything is energy, and if you can shift everything, that keeps you from getting stuck in the content of your thoughts. It lets you, in a sense, explore your thoughts in a somewhat abstract way, and that keeps you from getting stuck in what you thought the thoughts were about. Now, a thought could be something that you worry about. It could be something that you repeat to yourself. Here's an example of a thought that you might want to change. If you repeat to yourself something that is negative, such as, oh, this always happens to me, or there's no hope with this situation, and so forth. Now, some people would approach that by changing the words, and that's a valid approach. Because we are exploring frequency raising this evening, we are going to find out what happens when you do this entirely from the perspective of shifting the frequency of a thought. And there's a really unique power there because it bypasses the contents of the words entirely, and it deals with it as a phenomenon of vibration. So tune into something where you have a tendency to have a negative thought or a negative attitude. Could be anything at all. Now, look at the frequency scale and place your finger near the bottom of the scale while tuning into that thought. As you move your fingertip a few notches up on the scale, I want you to notice what starts to happen with that thought. Now, this might be a somewhat unusual request. Don't worry about the contents of the thought. Notice what happens to the feel of the thought or the vibe or texture of the thought. So, somewhat different process, but worth exploring because it gives you more mastery of working with energy and working with thoughts. So, your habitual stuck thought, start to wiggle your finger up and down, slowly and mindfully, raise the vibration, and really get a sense as you move your finger up on that chart, you are raising the vibration of that old, habitual, heavy thought. Don't force it up to the top because that just creates some resistance. Just move it up a little bit and then move it back down. Now, there's a funny thing about moving it back down. Because this process frees you from resistance, moving it back down is not quite the same as going back to where you were. Somewhat hard to explain, but when you move your finger up on the chart and then you move back to where you were, you are doing so mindfully. And it's a funny thing, but when you choose your state of consciousness or you choose your frequency, it's nothing like having a state of consciousness that you cannot control. So you are learning control. You are learning mindfulness. You are learning to be more conscious about the range of frequencies that you are made of, even the so-called lower frequencies. Now, move 3 to 6 notches higher and really track what happens. What happens to that heavy thought? You might actually find when you move up on the chart, the edges of that thought energy become lighter, as if they are fizzling away. And then go back a few notches and then a few notches even higher, maybe towards the middle to the somewhat upper range, slowly moving up, slowly moving down, still tracking this particular thought. Now here's the skill in using this technique. You are not trying to raise your frequencies so that you can escape the thought. That would simply be escapist. What you are doing here, you are actually, in a sense, putting the thought on the chart, and you are playing with shifting the frequency of the thought itself. This is the opposite of avoidance. You are boldly exploring this thought as an energy phenomenon. You are boldly moving it up and down the chart, and when you play with it that way, you lose your fear and resistance to the thought. And you start to realize something that almost seems mystical or magical, which is that what you thought was a particular stuck negative thought turns out to be merely a pattern of energy. So it's really interesting that when you raise the frequency of what you thought was negative, well, it turns out that it's not so negative. It could even be positive or neutral. It could be many different things, from neutral to positive. Now, at this point, you look lighter. Your aura is bigger, and you have freed yourself of some stuck energies, even though you did not try to change the content of the thought. Let's talk about how to use this for states of consciousness, such as how to get stable or how to get integrated. Let's assume that we could use the chart for levels of groundedness or levels of integration. So, since by habit we have been using the lower part of the chart for deeper frequencies and the upper part for higher frequencies, let's now use the chart to represent at the lowest end that's entirely grounded, entirely stable. And let's have the upper end represent very fragmented, just to show you that one end of the chart is not good and the other is not bad. It's a much more subtle thing that we are exploring. So place your finger somewhere on the chart and gently wiggle your finger towards the bottom end, representing grounded, stable, integrated. And gently wiggle up and down. Never just force your finger to be in any one place, because you are actually a range of frequencies. And by moving your finger at all times, it's helping you to discover that all of your frequencies are connected. So gently sweep gradually towards the bottom end of the chart, because that is helping you to access the frequencies of integration. That's bringing you stability. Now, you might be wondering, well, isn't it true that if you simply intend to be stable and grounded that you can achieve that? Yes, of course you can. When you make use of a frequency scale like this, it simply focuses your attention and helps you do things in a somewhat more grounded way. Now, let's explore how to use this technology for spiritual states of consciousness. So we look at the frequency scale. We want to do this without implying that there's judgment about the earthly state of consciousness, and we want to be able to bridge earthly and cosmic states. We are going to let the lower range represent the physical realm of things, And we are going to let the upper range of the scale represent cosmic consciousness. So the upper end is representing cosmic consciousness. So how are we going to bridge this? Working slowly and mindfully, place your finger at the lowest end of the depth or frequency scale. And that's helping you tune into the physical. Slowly sweep your finger up and then back down. And get a sense that as you do that, you are uniting the physical parts of you with the soul or with the cosmic aspects of you, the universal aspects. So you are weaving them together. Now, an important point here is that the deeper states of spiritual awareness require that you be integrated. Now, centuries ago, people sometimes had escapist philosophies, and so they thought that if they could escape their bodies, they would be in a spiritual state of consciousness. But that is simply avoidance. It is escapist. It is not a higher state. We realize now that being integrated is the way you achieve deeper states of spiritual consciousness. So this is a very creative technique that we're doing right here, because you are gently sweeping your fingertip up and down at your own pace. Maybe for a short period of time, you would do the lower end of the chart to weave the physical body to the emotions, and then maybe for a short period of time, you would tune into the upper end of the chart, and you would bring the cosmic parts of you and help integrate them by gently sweeping your fingertip up and down around that higher range of the scale. You are integrating your cosmic divine essence with your mind, with your emotions, with your body. And if you're wondering, well, is there an exact frequency on the chart that represents the body? It's a general range. Don't look for exact frequencies. The preoccupation with doing this too exactly is a preoccupation of the linear mind. That linear mind can actually get in the way. So intuitively sense, as you move your fingertip, you are uniting the cosmic parts of you with the mental parts, with the emotional parts, with the physical parts. Now, as you practice this, always notice the subtle felt shifts. That's one of the keys of doing this technique and doing most metaphysical techniques. Discover the felt shift, the shift that you can feel. And typically it's very subtle. The reason that the felt shift is so important is that you can think all you want at an abstract level, but when you use words and when you are thinking, those thoughts are not really experiencing the heart of things. So sensing the state of consciousness is the real experience. Simply knowing about it or thinking about it, it's as if you were wondering what was happening in a building, but you were looking in the window. To get into the building and discover what's actually living within the building, you have to be there. So working with the frequency scale and tuning into the shifts as you feel them, that's really educating you at a very deep level about how to be more conscious. A question comes up about how to use this for inanimate object. That would probably deserve a class unto itself. But briefly, let's practice with something, because as you might imagine, if everything is energy and using the frequency scale, if you can raise the vibration of something, it follows that you can raise the vibration of anything. Now, let's take as something to explore just for a moment the immediate environment you are in, the room where you are. How do you raise the vibration of a room? Well, notice that there are certain principles that have held true for everything that we've done this evening. You tune into something, and then you tune into the scale, and you gently maintain awareness of whatever you're tuning into while moving your finger on the scale. So that applies here to your room. So you tune into your room, and you gently move your finger up the scale, and gently back down, gently wiggling up and down from any point on the scale. Now, as you do this, you can have the intention that you are going to gently raise the frequency of the room. Now, there might be certain aspects of the room you know to be heavier. There might be certain corners of the room that feel heavier, for example. So you could specifically raise the frequency of those areas of the room, or you could work in a more general way. Or you might have, for example, a room at work, and it could be a place where people had conferences or where they had discussions or arguments or whatever might be happening there. You could tune into that particular pattern in that room, and you could shift the frequency for that pattern in that room. That's how specific this can be. Or you can work in a general way and simply raise the frequency of the room. So always notice what's the subtle change, what's the felt shift that you experience. Raise the frequency a little bit, just wiggle your finger a little bit, and that gets you out of the stuck state. It shifts you or the room or whatever you're working with out of that stuck state. Now, the reason it's more powerful to shift something a little bit than to simply force it to the top of the scale is that when something has been stuck and negative and in resistance, it's going to resist strongly if you force it into a much higher state of consciousness because it simply cannot do that. The power of moving something to a somewhat higher state of consciousness, it's subtle, so there is no resistance. That's the power of doing things in a subtle way. Now, it takes a little bit of training to do that because the inclination is to want to change something utterly and completely. But when you realize that you don't have to change something completely because you get more benefits by changing it just a little bit. And when you become familiar with that, it actually changes your consciousness because then you start to look at how can I change this somewhat? Because you know that once you change it somewhat, in a sense, you've accessed that state of consciousness where change is possible. And once you change it a little bit, then you realize and recognize that you can change it a little bit more. And so a lot of opportunities become available to you. Let's do a little bit of work to utilize this technique for therapy, specifically your reaction to situations, your reaction to events that have taken place, or your concerns about events that have not yet occurred. Now, people talk about having a higher state of consciousness, and that's very much what we are considering here. The notion that you could have a higher perspective and that you could do it by using the rate of vibration, by raising your vibration using the frequency scale. Now, it might have occurred to you that if something has already happened, well, isn't it already fixed in time or fixed in consciousness? The answer is not exactly, because everything is energy and you really can make subtle shifts in how you perceive things. And it could be that on some subtle level you're actually changing reality, but it is perfectly safe to do. And let's explore how we might accomplish that. So you have some event that happened somewhere in your timeline, and let's assume it's something that either bothered you at the time, but you still maybe have some awareness of it, so it must still be affecting you in some manner. So what do you do with that event? Well, let's assume that you could take a little photograph of that event, and just for fun, let's put that little photograph of the event, just imagine this, put it on the frequency scale. And just play with this, just explore. Let's discover what happens. Put that little picture of the event on the frequency scale and then slowly move it up a few notches to a higher frequency. Now, there's something that almost seems magical or mystical here, but what often happens when you shift the frequency where something exists, it starts to look and feel different, generally somewhat lighter. And it brings up interesting questions about reality. But whatever the truth of the matter is, what you thought was a certain way is now starting to change. Now, move that little picture way up on the scale and move it down and just slide it around on the scale. What you might discover is that there are certain places on the frequency scale where that incident starts to vibe differently. It might feel lighter. It could even feel happy. And you might think, well, what in the world is going on? Now, if you find yourself thinking, oh, well, that was a sad event, so that's kind of strange that I move it up on the scale and it starts to feel happy. That doesn't make any sense. Well, in ordinary thinking, it does not make any sense. But what you're starting to realize is that if everything is energy, it could be that it felt heavy or it felt sad or negative because it was stuck at a slow frequency. When something is stuck at a stagnant energy level, well, it cannot be very happy. Now remember, if you try and force it to a much higher frequency, and if you try and keep it on a much higher frequency, you're probably going to get resistance. So, to be fair to yourself, be easy on yourself, move it up, and then slide it back down. But the funny thing is, when you slide it back down, you have already released something, and so you're not going to go back to the heavy place where you were. That's something that's challenging to explain. How come when you're working with something and you bring it up and then you bring it back down, you don't go back to the same heavy place? It's because the process of doing this, of working with sliding around on the frequency scale, makes it so that you are in less resistance. And the process of sliding around on the scale makes it so that you are not so stuck in any particular place. You actually start to open up to the possibilities of the full range of the frequency scale when you explore it in this healing way. So play with this on your own time. Take different situations that you recall, move them around on the frequency scale. And you might be amazed to discover that it's harder and harder to remember the heavy stuff because it's actually transmuting. You are transmuting that incident. You can learn so much about yourself and about consciousness by doing this. So in conclusion, play with this, explore this. I say play because you don't want it to be heavy work, but do it mindfully and slowly and gently, and you will find that this is a powerful mystical practice that helps you to have a deeper understanding of yourself and reality and helps you achieve subtle, more enlightened views of what's possible for yourself and for other people in this incarnation. Thank you for joining in this experience. Infinite peace, infinite wellness. May you be integrated and attuned to deeper things in wondrous ways each day. Thank you, and many blessings.